The world you know exists only because one invasion never happened. In another timeline, fleets carved across the ocean like blades, and the first meeting of civilizations became a massacre without survivors. Forests burned red, cities drowned in screams, entire peoples disappeared before their names were ever spoken. If you want to explore the timelines built on ashes, subscribe. Welcome to Parallel History. In the early 15th century, the world's oceans were not empty, silent borders. They were frontiers of ambition, carrying emperors' hopes and merchants' fears across unpredictable waters. At this moment, the Ming Dynasty stood at a height no rival power could ignore. Under the Yongle Emperor, China commanded the most advanced maritime capabilities on Earth. Its fleets were enormous, its shipbuilding knowledge unmatched, its navigational precision far beyond any contemporary navy. At the heart of these expeditions stood the Admiral Zheng, a towering figure whose voyages carried the Ming banner across Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and the eastern coast of Africa. From 1405 to 1433, the treasure fleets projected Chinese influence on a scale the world had never seen. Some of these ships dwarfed the vessels that, decades later, would ferry Europeans across the Atlantic. Chinese junks could cross oceans with hundreds of sailors, scholars, soldiers, and diplomats on board. And yet, despite this technological and logistical advantage, these voyages halted. Court politics shifted. Confucian officials argued that maritime adventures were wasteful distractions. Resources were redirected toward defending against northern threats. The fleet was dismantled, blueprints destroyed, shipyards abandoned. China turned inward just as Europe prepared to turn outward. From this reversal emerged the world we inherited, one where Western powers sailed across the Atlantic, encountered the Americas, and reshaped global history through conquest, colonization, and the birth of new nations. China, once poised to dominate the seas, stepped back from the edge of a global future. But what if this moment had gone differently? What if the admiral's map survived, the shipyards thrived, and the Ming court embraced the ocean instead of retreating from it? What if China, not Europe, had reached the shores of the Americas first? History didn't end, it just went elsewhere. The divergence begins not with a battle or a storm, but with a bureaucratic decision, one meeting inside the Forbidden City in 1433. Historically, conservative ministers persuaded the Zhuangde emperor to abandon maritime expeditions. In our alternate timeline, their influence falters. A different voice rises, a faction of reformist court officials who argue that maritime trade is the lifeline of imperial strength. They present reports detailing profits from foreign tribute, strategic advantages along the Indian Ocean, and warnings that great powers fall when they cease to learn from distant horizons. The emperor, struck by the moral weight of maintaining the empire's heavenly mandate, reverses course. Instead of halting voyages, he orders an expansion. New shipyards are built along the Yangtze. Naval academies in Nanjing and Quanzhou teach navigation, foreign languages, and oceanic astronomy. Zheng, aging but revered, oversees the training of a new generation of commanders. This decision changes everything. With imperial backing, the 9th Treasure Fleet launches in 1436, pushing beyond the traditional routes. The admiral's successors, armed with improved maritime maps and a mandate to explore, venture deeper into the Pacific. Their goal is no longer diplomacy alone, but the systematic charting of the world's oceans. Chinese cartographers begin assembling a global map decades before the first Portuguese ships round Africa's Cape of Good Hope. Meanwhile, ocean currents carry whispers of land to the Far East, stories from Polynesian navigators about vast territories beyond the horizon. In our alternate timeline, these stories reach Ming scholars through trade networks extending into the South Pacific. A decision is made. The next expedition will follow these currents. The political logic is clear. If China reaches these unknown lands, it secures not only new tributaries, but also unimaginable prestige. The psychological impact on the imperial court is profound. The sense of maritime destiny becomes self-reinforcing. Success leads to more investment, which leads to greater ambition. Thus, in 1445, long before Columbus is even born, the Ming Dynasty's armada sets a course across the Pacific. The divergence point is complete. China does not retreat inward, it looks outward. And the world begins to shift around that single choice. The first shockwave spreads across the Pacific between 1445 and 1450. When the Ming fleet sights land on the western coast of the Americas, likely near modern-day Mexico or California, depending on currents and winds. The encounter is peaceful but transformative. The Chinese do not come as conquerors, nor as settlers carrying crusades. They arrive as emissaries of an empire that views diplomacy as the first tool of influence. Mesoamerican societies, particularly the Mexica and the Maya, encounter a maritime power unlike anything in their cosmology. These are not rival city-states. These are visitors from an unimaginable distance. Their ships are floating cities. Their bronze tools, silk garments, and astronomical instruments dazzle local elites. Diplomacy follows ritual. Gifts are exchanged. Envoys attempt to learn one another's languages. The Chinese, adhering to tribute system thinking, treat these civilizations not as equals, but as potential partners in a hierarchical order centered around the Ming court. Word spreads swiftly across indigenous trade networks. Powerful strangers from the ocean have arrived. Curiosity, awe, and strategic anxiety ripple through political centers. Leaders seeking advantage invite Chinese envoys. Others worry about imbalance and begin strengthening alliances. The Americas enter a new era of diplomatic complexity decades before Europeans arrive. Back in China, news of a vast eastern continent sparks excitement. Reports describe fertile lands, precious metals, and advanced civilizations. The court responds by dispatching additional expeditions, some diplomatic, some economic, some scientific. Small outposts emerge along the Pacific coast, serving as resupply points and cultural contact zones. This triggers a chain reaction. If China is committed to eastward exploration, then its naval presence in the Indian Ocean grows even stronger. The Ming begin to dominate trade routes, linking East Africa, Arabia, India, Southeast Asia, and now the Americas. The treasury swells. The perception of imperial invincibility expands. Meanwhile, the Polynesian navigators, already masters of the Pacific, become critical intermediaries. Cultural exchange flourishes as Ming scholars learn Polynesian star navigation, while island societies adopt Chinese metal tools and textile techniques. This knowledge accelerates cross-Pacific travel. Europe, still in its early age of discovery, senses a shift. Portuguese explorers in the 1460s and 1470s hear rumors of Chinese fleets beyond the Indian Ocean. Their strategic anxiety grows. If China reaches the Americas first, Europe is no longer the pioneer of the global age, it is the follower. The first shockwave culminates in a geopolitical truth. China is now the first trans-oceanic empire. The Americas have been contacted, mapped, and partially integrated into the Ming world order. And Europe knows it. Across the next century, the world reshapes itself layer by layer. The aftermath is not a sudden collapse, but a slow reconfiguration of power, culture, and destiny. Within China, the empire evolves into a maritime civilization. The treasure fleets, once symbolic, become institutional. Naval careers rival civil service positions in prestige. Coastal cities transform into global ports, buzzing with traders from Africa, Arabia, Southeast Asia, and now the Americas. Maritime taxes fill the imperial treasury. Innovation accelerates. Improved compasses, hull designs, depotion, logistics, and astronomical navigation flourish under state patronage. Culturally, China becomes more outward-looking. Foreign languages enter academies. Tales of distant civilizations captivate playwrights. Scholars debate the ethics of empire across oceans. The Confucian ideal of benevolent hierarchy now extends to foreign nations across the Pacific, creating ideological justification for sustained engagement. In the Americas, Chinese contact alters political trajectories. Mesoamerican and Andean civilizations adopt new technologies, metal tools, advanced irrigation techniques, silk weaving, and elements of Chinese medicine. In return, the Ming become fascinated by indigenous agricultural marvels: maize, potatoes, tomatoes, cacao. These crops move westward along Pacific trade routes, enriching diets across Asia centuries earlier than in our timeline. Cultural blending emerges along the Pacific coast. Ceremonial jade from China merges with Mesoamerican iconography. Pottery styles reflect shared motifs. Linguistic borrowing begins, creating hybrid trade dialects used in coastal outposts. However, the influence is uneven. Some indigenous powers ally with China for economic advantage. Others resist foreign presence, wary of dependency. Regional tensions rise, leading to shifting alliances and occasional conflicts, but none resemble the catastrophic conquests. Europe would later unleash. Disease transmission occurs, but gradually, Chinese expeditions include medical officers who quarantine crew members, mitigating epidemics that historically devastated indigenous populations. This slower, more managed contact prevents demographic collapse. Mesoamerican and Andean populations remain strong, capable of negotiating with foreign powers rather than being overwhelmed. In Europe, the psychological impact is profound. The age of discovery becomes a race to catch up. Portuguese and Spanish monarchs, alarmed by China's Pacific ambitions, accelerate their own expeditions. But arriving in the Americas decades later, they encounter societies already engaged in diplomacy with a great Eastern empire. Their attempts at conquest face alliances fortified with Chinese metalworking, improved logistics. European colonization fails to take root in the same way. Without the catastrophic vulnerabilities that historically weakened indigenous societies, Spain's conquests stall. The Aztec and Inca empires, bolstered by Chinese partnerships, navigate European contact with greater resilience. Some Europeans become traders, mercenaries, or missionaries, but they do not dominate. The power balance shifts globally. The Ming-centered trade network becomes the world's primary economic system. Europe, lacking colonial wealth, experiences slower economic growth. The Renaissance still occurs, but its trajectory is muted. Fewer resources flow into art, warfare, and scientific experimentation. Religion evolves differently. Catholic missionaries attempt to enter the Pacific world, but face stiff competition from Confucian. Buddhist and indigenous cosmologies, syncretic belief systems emerge across coastal America, blending Chinese ancestor reverence, local deities, and Polynesian celestial traditions. The spiritual map of the hemisphere becomes pluralistic rather than dominated by Christianity. By the late 1500s, the Ming Empire establishes formal protectorates along parts of the American Pacific coast, not colonies, but treaty-based relationships. These regions become multicultural hubs of trade, administration, and education. Indigenous nobles send their children to study in Nanjing. Chinese artisans settle in American cities, marrying into local communities. Technology diffuses rapidly. Indigenous engineers incorporate Chinese metallurgy into city defenses. Chinese mechanists learn agricultural techniques perfected over millennia in the Andes. The exchange fuels joint innovations, hybrid irrigation systems, new crops, improved textiles, and ocean-going vessels built using both Chinese and Polynesian design principles. As Europe struggles to compete, the balance of global power transforms permanently. China, with its tributary maritime system, becomes the dominant force of the early modern world. Indigenous American civilizations remain politically independent but economically intertwined with the Pacific network. The world becomes polycentric. China, Mesoamerica, the Andes, and parts of Southeast Asia share influence in a global system where Europe is a regional power, not a global hegemon. By the dawn of the 20th century, the world shaped by China's early arrival in the Americas looks nothing like our own. Instead of a Euro-American Atlantic axis defining global politics, the Pacific Ocean is the world's central arena. Its coasts form a continuous arc of influence. Beijing, Kyoto, Manila, Tenochtitlan, Cusco, and dozens of hybrid cities that grew from centuries of cultural exchange. The United States never forms as we know it. Instead, the western half of North America develops into a mosaic of indigenous kingdoms, merchant republics, and Ming-aligned protectorates. Eastern North America, influenced by smaller European settler communities, evolves separately. A culturally mixed region shaped by British, French, indigenous, and Chinese influences, none capable of dominating the others. Industrialization begins earlier in Asia due to access to American crops. Chinese engineers experimenting with calorie, high-yield foods like potatoes and maize create demographic surges and labor forces able to support rapid mechanization. By the mid-1900s, steam power becomes widespread in China and its Pacific allies, creating trans-Pacific shipping lanes decades before the Suez Canal exists. By 1900, a Pacific Commonwealth has formed organically, not a single empire, but a constellation of allied states linked by language, technology, trade, and centuries of shared history. Many American civilizations modernize without losing cultural integrity. Tenochtitlan becomes a metropolis of steel bridges, electric street lamps, and temples repurposed as national museums. The Andes developed formidable engineering industries, specializing in mountain railways and geothermal power. Conflicts still occur, but the world's major wars look different. Without European supremacy, the world wars do not center on Europe. Instead, tensions rise between the Pacific Commonwealth and an industrializing Europe seeking greater global influence. The largest conflicts are naval and economic, fought across trade routes rather than trenches. Technology follows a different path as well. Asian medical traditions merge with indigenous botanical knowledge, producing advances in pharmacology. Architecture blends Chinese urban planning with Mesoamerican geometry. Spiritual life is pluralistic. Confucian ethics, Buddhist principles, and indigenous cosmologies coexist. By the 21st century, global superpowers are not nations but blocs. The Pacific Commonwealth, anchored by China, reinforced by Mesoamerican and Andean powers, connected through centuries of shared institutions, dominates world trade, diplomacy, and scientific research. Europe remains influential but secondary. Much like Japan in our world, advanced, wealthy, but not geopolitically defining. Technologically, the world is hyper-maritime. Underwater rail systems, floating megacities, and sustainable ocean farming flourish. Climate policy is more advanced due to indigenous ecological knowledge being integrated into early industrial planning. Daily life reflects this blended heritage. A typical citizen in a 21st century Pacific metropolis speaks several languages: Mandarin, a regional indigenous tongue, and a trade Creole developed centuries earlier. Public rituals involve both ancestral rites and celebrations of astronomical cycles, inherited from pre-Columbian civilizations. The Pacific identity is not a nationality but a shared worldview, harmony with nature, balance in governance, and respect for both lineage and innovation. In this world, discovery was not an act of conquest. It was a negotiation, a conversation, a meeting of horizons, and the planet became something entirely different because of it. Yet no alternate timeline escapes its price, and this world harmonious on the surface carries shadows of its own. China's early dominance prevents Europe's rise, but it also entrenches a global hierarchy centered around Confucian bureaucracy. Meritocracy becomes rigid. Innovation often bends to state approval. Dissent is tolerated less than in the pluralistic societies of the real Atlantic world. Where Europe's fragmentation historically fueled intense scientific competition, the Pacific Commonwealth's ideological unity sometimes suppresses unorthodox ideas. Indigenous civilizations, though spared the devastation of conquest, still navigate dependency. Their political autonomy fluctuates with each shift in Beijing's priorities. Entire generations grow up negotiating for influence within a system not of their own making. Some cultural traditions flourish through exchange. Others fade quietly beneath the pressure to align with imperial expectations. The Pacific Trade Empire, while peaceful compared to European colonization, is not without exploitation. Mineral wealth from the Andes fuels industrial expansion in East Asia. Pacific outposts become hubs of opportunity, but also centers of labor extraction. The ocean unites the hemisphere, but it also creates vast inequalities between coastal elites and inland rural populations. Spiritually, multicultural blending enriches the world but also blurs identities. Some communities struggle to preserve ancestral rituals, overshadowed by dominant Confucian, moral teachings, or modern secularism. Younger generations feel suspended between cultural worlds, belonging fully to none. Even global peace has a cost. Without the existential shocks of Europe's world wars, destructive, yet transformative, many societies cling more tightly to tradition. Social reform is slower. Hierarchies endure. Progress moves in careful, deliberate steps. And yet the greatest hidden cost may be psychological: the silence of paths never traveled. In this world, people look across the Pacific and see only what was chosen for them by emperors centuries before. The sense of destiny is heavy. History feels orchestrated rather than accidental. A world without conquest is not a world without power. A world without Europe's dominance is not automatically a world without oppression. Every timeline carries its own shadows. History is not a river flowing toward a predetermined sea. It is a maze of branching currents, any one of which might have carried us somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere extraordinary. The difference between the world we know and the world that might have been often rests on choices so small they disappear into the dust of archives, an imperial decree, a lost map, an argument in a forgotten hall. China's treasure fleets had the means to reshape the world. They stood at the edge of a future that shimmered with possibility. But history favored hesitation, and in that hesitation, an entire planet turned toward a different destiny. It is tempting to imagine that discovery guarantees enlightenment or that contact ensures harmony. But history is always fragile. The smallest shift in wind or will can transform continents. Our world is not an inevitability. It is a survivor of countless near misses. When we explore alternate timelines, we are not escaping reality, we are confronting it. We are reminded of humanity's capacity for both brilliance and blindness, for cooperation and conquest, for wisdom and error. And we remember that the future, like the past, is never fixed. History didn't end. It just went elsewhere.